As we analyze modern day and age problems, one can consider that on December 10th, 1948, in Paris, the United Nations developed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was an article that established equal, universal rights for all humans across the world, regardless of their sex, nationality, financial status, and all other aspects of life that differentiate us. There was only one problem, though. Countless countries and organizations around the world have been defying these statements, and one of the prominent acts towards this injustice would be the Hong Kong government's response to the large amount of protests that have occurred in the previous year. This documentary is segmented into 5 separate parts, all giving needed insight towards our situation: our introduction, our context, the extradition bill, the protests, and finally, the conclusion. As we proceed, keep in mind the statement that explains our situation in hand. The reason why it is so difficult to resolve this problem is because of the extremity of the situation and the strong political tensions between Hong Kong's government and the government of mainland China. In order to fully develop an understanding of the situation of Hong Kong, one must acknowledge the previous history of Hong Kong before it was released to China in 1997. Hong Kong was under colony of the British rule. When it was released, it did not completely merge with China. It became an administrative region. It operates under its own policy that was bestowed upon it when it was given to China, called One Country, Two Systems. The policy essentially gave autonomy to Hong Kong and allowed for it to have a vast amount of freedom in how it could operate. For example, like a democracy. It has its own government and has maintained a strong relationship with mainland China's government, or the Communist Party of China. Hong Kong is also a very financially successful area in terms of trade, tourism, and its natural resources, which provide revenue to China, so the Communist Party would have it in their ideals to maintain Hong Kong as a valuable asset. The Chinese Communist Party may be a little too involved with maintaining of Hong Kong, as over half of their executive officials are pro-Beijing, or, to say it in a different way, they're in favor of supporting the agenda of the CPP. With a strong majority hold over the Hong Kong government, situations of exploitation are bound to occur, and that's just what happens when we talk about our next topic. Flash forward to February 12th, 2019. On this very day, it was that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, or SAR government, announced that a new bill would be coming into subject. The bill's name was the Extradition Bill, and it's the main cause that started a lot of the protests heavily found in media. Now, what exactly is extradition? Well, it's the process of taking criminals that are located outside of a native country and having the access to detain them, regardless of the other country's agreements with said extradition. So essentially, Hong Kong would be able to detain criminals outside of Hong Kong in places like mainland China and Taiwan without repercussions. The bill did come into perspective because authorities needed the certification to capture a wanted man located in Taiwan for the murdering of his girlfriend. Now, does this all sound good? Well, not really, and Hong Kong citizens were quick to identify the massive loopholes found in the bill itself. Remember now that the majority of Hong Kong's government sides with mainland China, is in favor of China's ideals. If there were any possibilities of people that Hong Kong didn't like, or people that pose a threat to the mainland China's ideals or power, with this bill, they could easily detain them, and that's what citizens were quick to pick up on. Any protesters or activists would easily be detained through the passing of this law, and citizens were not happy about it. This is why the extradition bill was one of the largest demands of change ever seen throughout the history of the Chinese government. Skip forward a little bit to June 12th, 3 days after a protest of about 1 million people directed by an organization named the Civil Human Rights Front. Here, we can see tens of thousands of protesters demonstrating their hatred for the bill outside of the Legislative Council building, where the bill was supposed to be having its second reading. Skip forward a few more days, about 3 days in total, and the cries of the protesters had been heard. The bill had indefinitely been suspended until further notice, but was this enough to calm the crowds of the Hong Kong citizens? Not in the slightest. As well as wanting the total discontinuation of the bill, protesters rallied their strength to advocate for additional problems present with the current day Hong Kong, and this leads to our next section. As there were countless amounts of protests demonstrated throughout Hong Kong, and the tensions between the protesters and police force continued to gain extremity, we center in on one of the more prominent protests seen at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Schools and universities became the epicenter of the protests due to an unfortunate situation between police officials and a Hong Kong University Science of Technology student named Chow, where Chow unfortunately fell one story off of a car parking lot and succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. Thousands of citizens of Hong Kong, student and civilian, attended a memorial for Chow as homage towards him as a person and hope for reformation to soon come. As stated previously, as well as the extradition bill, there were many other reasons of protesting, such as political reformation to establish a democracy throughout Hong Kong and bring awareness towards the police's abuse of power invested in them, and scenes such as Chow's were evidence enough that the protests must continue. At the Polytechnic University on November 18th of 2019, the protests began and only escalated in scale from there. Keep in mind that the event of this protest lasted about a week in length. While increasing conflict occurred between police and protester, there was an eventual retreat from the protesters after police had used their equipment such as tear gas, rubber bullets, and stun grenades to contain protesters inside the university. While there was a successful retreat from a few protesters, a large majority of them were caught and detained. Wrapping back to the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR, one can identify that the response from the Hong Kong government is in direct offense of the 21st article of the UDHR, which states that, quote, everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives, end quote. The injustice present has continued to not be resolved due to the Hong Kong government being long in the process of suppressing the voices of their citizens in favor of maintaining the current relationship that they have with the Chinese mainland government. They agree with the Chinese media, which proclaims the protesters as nothing more than terrorists or brainwashed from foreigners, and they do this to maintain the current state of power and suppress all other forms of government, other than the Communist Party of China, of course. And with the intensity of the conflicts between police officers and activists, as there is violence coming from both sides of the situation, there are no signals prevalent that this situation will calm down towards a peaceful dialogue to better the current injustice towards the UDHR. But with the media and government suppressing them, it almost feels necessary to bring these demonstrations to such a level of extremity so that the world may become aware and report on the current situation at hand.